Paratusum, paratuses?
Oremus.
Animam in profundum imum demersam, semel emerge oratione mea iube. Desperationi lacrimae lique funt igne in aeterno, mute partes nebulae stellarum cadunt. Dum complectitur oct carmen dormiena tempore, tabiscritur letiate sanguine et pietate. Amen. Ave. Ego sum ovis rex et sacri reges sum. Hic es amicus meus Sagittarius rex. Apocalypse expectat. Alright, enough of that. Hi, I'm Sheep, and this is my friend Cheese.
Hello.
Well, we're back, and this time with Sand of Destruction, and honestly, I'm feeling pretty good coming from that video. After what had happened with Luminous Arc 2, I went back and just said, okay, I don't work well with any time constraint, and let's just let this thing ride out. And honestly, I think it worked really well. So, Cheese, I know you saw a massive improvement from Luminous Arc 2. What are your thoughts on Sand of Destruction?
I think it was remarkably better paced than your previous videos. There was a good structure to it. It didn't hold you for too long on any particular points. Some good funnies in there because you got to retain your audience, you know. So overall, I think process-wise improved, product-wise improved. Overall, I think you learned a lot.
I'm really glad that everything that I've learned since Luminous Arc 2 and the other videos is actually starting to come into play, because the next episode, Seventh Dragon, is something that I really want to talk about, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video. But right now, we're going to be using the podcast a lot more experimentally. So with the story segment, I've decided to pre-record that, and you'll see that in the future. And also, with that story segment, I'm also using a different microphone. I'm really going back to this more experimental feel with just trying a bunch of different things, throwing it at you, the audience, and you just telling me, like, this works, this doesn't work. So that way we get a better feel of what I can improve on. So the videos themselves are much more improved, and you are seeing not only me as someone who is trying to tell you the story of Imageepoch, but also someone who is improving on that storytelling ability. I know it's going to be kind of crazy with the podcast, but Cheese, what are your thoughts on really using this as a test bed?
So when you sent it to me originally, I was like, oh, okay, so it's the story segment. I wasn't expecting you to toss in the music clips. I thought you were going to do like a robot voice or something equally kind of silly.
Right.
But I'm curious to see how that product turns out, because me, as a fan of like the art of Foley, just shoving random sounds into things, it's really, really fun to just do that to random pieces of media and see how they turn out. Right.
And honestly, with that bit, like, it is more of me trying to throw a bunch of random things. I think with Sand of Destruction and that story segment where I do have that, that was honestly lightning in a bottle for me. And if the only regret for me on that story segment was not having Alex Yeek fucking dancing while you see Masato Kato's face and I'm talking about suicide, like, I think that was a pretty good, like, lightning in a bottle moment, and I need to find a way to consistently capture that feeling. So hopefully, when we talk about that story segment, it won't be too crazy, but I will tell you right now, get ready for, like, kind of jump scary moments. I'm going to not try to make the volume too loud when I'm, like, putting in random noises, but just be aware that is going to be a little bit weird. Enough about the, like, nuts and bolts of what we're doing with the videos in the background. Let's talk about the thing that I'm really excited about, and that is the history and staff of Sand of Destruction and everything that may have led up to it. So with the credits, the kanji font is finally readable. Coming from Luminous Arc 2, where the background was orange and the kanji font was too small, I could barely make out some of the nanori. That really upset me on a personal level, so having a black background with white font and the font is large enough that I can see the radicals in every character, that made it a lot better, and I think this is giving you something that I want to share with you. with that in mind, let's talk about the elephant in the room. With Sand of Destruction, and I'm going to abbreviate it as SOD, so that way we're not wasting everyone's time. But with SOD, a lot of the promotional material and a lot of the marketing was so focused on Masato Kato and Yasunori Mitsuda, the writer and composer, respectively, and it is more or less shoved in your face. Hey, this new game from Imageepoch, it's going to have the writer from Xenogears, it's going to have the writer from Chrono Cross. From the audience and from the regular consumer's perspective, if you're looking at that, you're seeing Xenogears, Chrono Cross from the makers of, and you're going to be thinking that this is like a spiritual sequel to the sequels that we never got. At this point in time, we had just finished Xenosaga, and Xenosaga was pretty much hit or miss. A lot of people didn't really like the characterization, some people loved it, but at the end of Xenosaga, which was supposed to be this reimagining of Xenogears, it just left something to be desired. With Chrono and that whole series in general, you have Chrono Cross and people wanted more. There was talks of this title being trademarked somewhere called Chrono Break, so people were excited that they were going to get another sequel to Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger, but it never came to fruition. At the creation of Sand of Destruction, and when the media is talking about it, there is this feeling of this build-up, this anticipation that Sand of Destruction is going to be what everyone wanted. You have this indie studio that's not afraid to just make a game for the sake of making a game, and with Mikage's way of saying, I'm going to put people in a room and we're going to make a great game. You have that managerial style and that feeling of, we're going to try to make this lightning in a bottle effect, we're going to try to make everything perfect again. I personally think that because all of the returning creative staff from Xenogears and Chrono Cross showed up in the media, the hype backfired. And everyone and the consumers were expecting Xenogears 2 or Chrono Break, but we have to remember that every time Imageepoch tries to make a new IP, for example, Luminous Arc or Detective Conan, they have the tendency to drop the ball. Usually there's like some sort of balance problem, but ultimately what may have happened was all this hype built up to being Xenogears 2, and it just became so hard for SOD to get out of the shadow of Xenogears and Chrono Cross. The battle system itself is very similar to Xenogears, and the plot, while it does have its edgy moments, it never really has this punch that Xenogears had towards the end of the game, and it just felt like it was safe. And that's something we're going to talk about, especially when we talk about having to rewrite the plot. I'm not going to talk about just these nebulous things, I'm going to talk about sales. In the first week in Japan, Sand of Destruction sold 56,000 copies. We have to compare this to Luminous Arc 2. In Japan, its first week, Luminous Arc 2 sold 41,000 copies. And it's still better than Luminous Arc 1, their very first game, that sold 26,000 copies in its first week. Right now, you're seeing a gradual increase, right? You're seeing this development of a fan base. But let's compare it to Xenogears sales. In Xenogears, this came out at around 1998, 1999-ish. Its opening week had 437,000 sales. Now, keep in mind that this is about 8 years in the past, right? Games making that many sales are unheard of. When it comes to the re-release of Chrono Trigger on the DS, it sold 270,000 copies in its first week. There is this massive disconnect. You are bringing the people in from Xenogears and Chrono Cross, but you're not seeing the sales. This is a lot harder to figure out what's driving the slight bump in sales or what's causing the drop in sales, because we have the anime being released concurrently with the game's release, but we don't know if it's the developer names really carrying it. Cheese, we're not part of this industry, but what do you think drove and caused that slight bump in sale from 41,000 copies with Luminous Arc to about 56,000 copies with SOD.
At this point in time, I would consider Imageepoch in general to be sort of established in the Japanese indie scene, if you would call it that. Because of that, there's generally some more like word of mouth of, oh, this company is releasing this game. It will probably be of at least the bar of the last game, right, of Luminous Arc 2. But also, if you're pulling in a bunch of people who have known to be worked on good games, I don't know if that's necessarily good advertising strategy because of the 8-9 years between the games. I don't think the names hold that much value beyond like 3 or 4 years. It's possible that there was just some more avenues of advertising, maybe. This was around 2008, so I would call that sort of the beginnings of online video game advertising. I'm not entirely sure, though.
When you think about it, with Luminous Arc 1, this was at the beginning of YouTube. So this is when Atlas had their first YouTube channel, and one of the oldest videos on Atlas's channel is an advertisement for Luminous Arc 1. So that is possibly driving the sales too. Like I mentioned before, the anime may have had something to do with it, right? It was, I think it was being shown at, everyone calls it otaku o'clock, like midnight to 1 a.m. That may have bumped up sales a little bit, but if we compare it to Xenogears sales, right, maybe that number was something that Mikage was thinking of, but do you think that same word of mouth may have contributed to a lack of sale?
Possibly. Do you remember if Xenogears was a first-party game or not?
Xenogears isn't first party. It's third party, but it's Squaresoft.
What other games did Squaresoft make before Xenogears?
Final Fantasy VII.
Okay, well, there you go. They know that they're expecting something of the caliber of Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, so that probably explains it.
Yeah, that definitely explains it.
Yeah, and I think to that point, and what you were talking about before, you can't really expect big names to result in big sales. Just because Mikage is capable of locking Masato Kato and Mitsuda into a room doesn't mean they're going to shit out solid gold every single time. What's very interesting about this mentality is that only a few months ago, when Kato was talking about Chrono Cross Remastered, there was an interview on Square Enix's channel, and one of his closing thoughts, and these are his exact words. You seldom see everything fit together so well. No matter how talented your team might be, there is no guarantee you can create something of value. So he was talking about Chrono Cross and just how everything just managed to fit. And despite all of Chrono Cross's shortcomings, right, the battle system, the unfinished artwork, how rushed the story is, it still managed to touch the hearts of the people who played the game, and people still remember it fondly despite it not being the best game on the PS1. At the same time, we can't really project Sand of Destruction and Imageepoch's failings onto Kato's words, right? He's made and he's written for a bunch of other games and has written for the Mana series, has written for several other games that haven't done very well, like Legend of the Legacy. So he could be talking about anything, really. Maybe he's not even talking about his experiences at all. With this idea of a big name and with the ideas of locking two very tight-knit developers together, Mitsuda and Kato tend to work together very frequently. The opening that Cheese and I spoke in Latin, this was actually the lyrics to Sand of Destruction's title screen. But the song was composed by Mitsuda, and the lyrics were written by Kato. This is the same thing that happens with Xenogears, where Mitsuda composes the song, Kato writes the lyrics. Same thing with Chrono Cross. And because they work together so well, even some games that are outside of Squaresoft have captured this energy before. There's this phone game called Deep Labyrinth that was produced in 2005 and then ported to the DS, but the writer was Masato Kato and the composer was Yasunori Mitsuda. with the creation of Sand of Destruction, this is an escalation from Luminous Arc 1. So, starting from Luminous Arc 1, you've got big voice actors, and you managed to pull in Yasunori Mitsuda right when he broke off from Square and is making his own studio. Then you get Detective Conan, which is one of the biggest manga and anime series in Japan, and then you just have to keep escalating. With Sand of Destruction, you pull in the artist from Xenogears, Kunihiko Tanaka, and then you pull in, at this time, a relatively unknown artist, but someone who worked in Drakengard and someone who Mikage worked with in the past. This is Kumihiko Fujisaka. This is the artist for Nier and all of Drakengard. This is only going to continue to escalate because with Seventh Dragon, you're basically pulling in the creative team from Etrian Odyssey. With The Last Ranker, you're going to get Kazushige Nojima, who helped write Final Fantasy VII. So, I personally think Sand of Destruction is the watershed moment when Mikage doesn't realize that this is an unsustainable strategy. I say this because Mikage is dragging in like a bunch of big names from the industry, but there is this disconnect that I'm still trying to find out what that is. Let's talk about Xenogears, one of my favorite games, but let's talk about some of its flaws. Xenogears has a very, very good story. If you just go on YouTube, look on Xenogears review or like Xenogears video essay, people are going to be talking relentlessly about the story. That's perfectly fine because I think the story is great. But you watch those videos. Tell me how long they talk about the battle system. You can more or less barrel through the game by just getting good equipment and just staying on top of your random battles, but some mechanics like AP storage where you can make an attack and then save up for this really huge combo never really comes into play outside of one fight. I'm talking about the Rasmus fight very early on in the game, and then you never use AP storage. The magic system Ether is only really good on 3 characters, and even then you need an item that breaks the game. Despite all of the shortcomings of the game itself, some fights are still kind of challenging because they're puzzles. A good example of this is Deus towards the end of the game, where the boss itself is going to have everyone's HP in the battle. Deus deals like 30,000 damage to itself, then 15,000, then it gets less and less, and you have to find a way to sustain your HP until you start seeing like triple-digit damage numbers on Deus, and then you can one-shot him. No one ever really talks about the game. There are some interesting things, but overall, Xenogears is a very easy game, and you can barrel through it. Like, Cheese, you don't play that many RPGs. If I just gave you like a spoiler-free walkthrough of like, go here, and I never told you like buy items or use certain characters, I can guarantee you that you can beat the game and maybe like game over once or twice.
That sounds pretty easy.
It's honestly very easy, but again, people rave about the story. People have written essays about the story. People have gotten their master's degrees by talking about the stories of Xenogears. But the game itself, the thing that people kind of want to play, is very easy. And really to, I guess, curtail this rant, whenever you buy a video game, Cheese, how important is like a big name to you? Like, do you ever purchase a game because of a voice actor or a game developer?
I think the last time I bought a game based on like a name, it wasn't really the name of like a voice actor or director or anything. It was more, I like this indie studio, Zachtronics. I know quality bar of their games. I am going to buy them and play them because I enjoy them.
Yeah, I agree. Like a name can carry. A recent example of mine is Void Stranger. I played the game Zero Ranger a few years ago. I loved it. And then along came Void Stranger, which is a puzzle game compared to Zero Ranger Shoot 'em Up. I said, well, I like the studio, I like Erasure, and I just bought it on a whim. To that end, sometimes a big name can draw in sales, but I don't think it ever guarantees the quality of the game, right? Like, there's always a chance that, let's say I bought Void Stranger and could have been just complete garbage. Like, you are taking a risk, but that still, it doesn't mean I'm going to eat garbage if someone I like made a game. If it's a bad game, I'm probably going to drop it, and I'm probably going to ask for a refund if I can still get a refund.
To that point, though, I have an additional thing to add. When I was looking for a job a couple years ago, I was looking at all sorts of video game positions because, programmer, so it's one of the options. I found that a lot of companies were marketing themselves as being alumni of bigger companies, as if it was drawing more people in. But when I looked at the products they were making, most of them were not going to be of the same success level as their parent company that they were trying to emulate.
Like, what do you think is a good example of that?
A lot of the companies I looked for were selling themselves as alumni from Riot Games of League of Legends fame. And the company I applied for, Singularity 6, is making I would call it an MMO. It's not really an MMO, but it kind of has a multiplayer element to it. Palia. When you look at it, it's got the art style from Riot, but it does not have the content that Riot Games style games provide. It's very bare bones and lackluster for the amount of effort they had put into the game at the time. I guess there's a lot of startup costs to smaller companies that they want to be the bigger company, but they don't realize how much work has been put in to get to that point.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. There are a lot of Kickstarter games that do this. One that I recently backed was Ratatan. And Ratatan had a lot of the developers coming from Patapon, which was a really fun rhythm game on the PSP. But, there are people that, saw through all that glitz. And they said, well, I'm looking at the game and it's very visually cluttered. And it's going to be very difficult to play the game, but it is definitely a trend that is much more recent and much more contemporary. But having it back in 2007, 2008, I think there was this level of, trust and this feeling that, hey, they broke off from the big company, good for them, let's give it a shot. And for whatever reason, that just didn't carry with Sand of Destruction.
There was probably a turning point around the mid-2000s where breaking off from a big company, you couldn't tell if they had broken off because they were a bad employee or because they wanted to do their own thing. You can never really know. Yeah,
and especially with how Mikage postures himself in interviews, it's very difficult to find things of tension, right? He's the CEO of Imageepoch, so he's always going to have this feeling of everything is fine, everything is perfect. Hey, look at this new game. So you're never really going to see that tension. Moving on to this feeling of something is wrong, but you can't put a finger on it. With Sand of Destruction, I think that Mikage wanted the same writing impact as Xenogears, and he wanted to make Xenogears, honestly, but he had very little understanding that there was a team behind that game. There was a driving force and someone with a vision. With the past games that Kato has worked on, Kato always had a support team with him. With Chrono Trigger, he had an outline that one of the writers, Yuji Horii, made, and he was also supported by Takahashi Tokiya and Yoshinori Kitase. Tokiya and Kitase were not only writers, but they were directors of the game. So there was always this driving force, this writer-director kind of feeling in that writing room. With Chrono Cross, Kato was the writer and director, so not only was he the one driving the vision, he was also the one writing the script, and he was also the one inputting the script. With Xenogears, you have Tetsuya Takahashi, who is not only the writer, but he's also the director. You also have Kaori Tanaka, and Kato was there supporting some scenes, but not really being the one with the directive voice. I think that was a big miss by Mikage. He didn't really understand, as a director, what the writer wanted. He was more or less saying, well, let's do what Xenogears did. And then Kato has to scramble I don't know how much of a collaborative effort there was between Mikage and Kato at the time, especially because within this time frame, Mikage is working on Arc Rise Fantasia and also working on Seventh Dragon. And that might cause a lot of the miscommunication and may have decreased the quality of the writing in SOD. I think to that end, we can talk about the rewrite. Somehow through development, and after the anime was shipped off to Production IG so they can work on their own thing, Mikage panicked about Kato's story being too dark. In March 2006, Zero, the rating system of video games in Japan, announced an overhaul to their rating system. With Zero, it's basically equivalent to the ESRB. So, for reference, if a game is rated A for all ages in Zero, that's equivalent to E for everyone in America. If we move a little bit further, a D rating, or 17 and older, is equivalent to a mature rating in America. The most notorious rating for Zero is a Z rating. Basically, that is equivalent to adults only in America. With a Z rating specifically, it is illegal to purchase if you are not 18 or above. Of all the video games that were rated in America, only 26 of them were given an AO rating. And of those 7, they backed down, like toned down violence, like in Manhunt 2, or in San Andreas, they removed the sex minigame so that way they could receive an M rating. Because even though these games net you some controversy and a bunch of press, they don't sell a game. This is further confounded with the fact that Nintendo, and if you go on their website right now to look at their ratings guidelines, there is a little note at the bottom of the page that says, Nintendo does not sell or license adult-only games. Getting a Z rating in Japan, the equivalent of an adults-only rating in America, that is a death wish. Rightfully, Mikage did panic, but I want to find out if Mikage knew something beforehand and didn't tell Kato. As a video game director, he should be telling his direct reports and he should be telling the writer, Zero made this change. You probably shouldn't cross these lines. But at the very same time, Kato has been working extensively with the Mana series. He wrote for Children of Mana, which was released in 2006. I think he did Heroes of Mana as well and Dawn of Mana, all released around the same time, and all released around the same time that Zero made those changes. So at some point, the director from the Mana series said, hey, here are the changes from Zero, don't write your stories like this. There are 2 sides you can look at, but I personally think that what had happened was Mikage said, all right, I don't care what you write, just make sure it's good and make sure it's a great RPG. And then Mikage reviewed it, and he said, oh shit, this is too dark. I honestly think that's the case, but geez, what do you think?
From some of the holes in the game, especially later on, it definitely feels that way.
Yeah, what are some of the holes that you're thinking of?
There's basically what it feels like a scene missing of an important plot point for someone's backstory, I think it was.
So Naja had this backstory of he was a half beastman, half human, but they never really talked about why he was being mistreated so poorly because his father, who is a beast lord, why is their kid more or less being treated like a zoo animal?
Yeah, stuff like that where I think there was probably something darker going on and they couldn't show that anymore.
There is one specific scene that I do mention when we're doing the story review, but there is a scene with Porcus Rex early in the beginning of the game where he bumps into a kid. The kid apologizes and Porcus Rex threatens to eat him. So what I think may have happened in the original draft was Porcus Rex eats the kid on screen, and then the main party shows up. They're horrified to see this carnage as Porcus Rex is eating this kid. I'm pretty sure that is the scene that Mikage read and he panicked.
Yeah. Also, just in general with the story, you could tell there was probably at least one rape segment somewhere in there with, half human, half beast hybrids basically everywhere. It probably happened, and they probably didn't want to put that in there anymore.
Kato has a tendency to get dark. With Radical Dreamers, the game that Kato vehemently tried to bury. For years, Kato refused to release Radical Dreamers with any package of Chrono Cross. He admitted on this Square Enix interview that Kato was writing from a place of frustration where he didn't have a lot of control. I guess as like a form of rebellion, he wrote something really, really dark. And even in Chrono Cross, Kato did not want a happy ending for Chrono. Like, towards the end of the game, Chrono gets killed, and you can do a side quest to revive him, but Kato did not want that side quest in. He just wanted this very dark and somber tone, and Squaresoft's policy at the time is no sad endings. Because Kato couldn't write his dark stuff, he went then on to write Radical Dreamers, which is something he had more control of, and kind of had that feeling of resentment carry along with him. But on the other hand, he can write very interesting set pieces, like in Final Fantasy VII. Towards the second half of the game, you go into Cloud's, the main character's subconscious, and it's very cerebral. You get this revelation about Cloud that he's not who he is. You have some very fantastic ideas, but I think that may be a flaw within Kato, where he can write incredible scenes, and I guess his writing can't really carry a story. For example, with Xenogears, he wrote the entire opening segment of Lahan. And then he wrote Shevat, which is the climax of Disc 1. It is incredible, but that ability of scene writing doesn't really carry to a game as a whole, right? When you start to zoom out and start to think about things, something's missing, and I think that is where the other writers came in to help Kato. With Mikage, though, just because he's seeing Kato and because he's seeing the end result of the games he worked on, he never really made that connection and said, well, we need to get you a team of writers. You're seeing, I guess, Masato Kato at his truest state, where something is missing and he really did need a team to help back him up. We can talk about the big names all we want, but part of this segment is also talking about the returning staff. Junichi Watari shows up as special thanks. From Luminous Arc 1, he was a character sprite designer, and from Luminous Arc 2, he moved on to a UI designer. A few weeks ago, I found this article that was interviewing Junichi Watari and another UI designer from Imageepoch in their PSP era, and he is talking about his, path within Imageepoch, and he is going to show up a lot more. So the UI design was partially helped by him, but only in a slight capacity, as he was just special thanks. You have Kazumi Mitome, who is a composer and who works directly with Mitsuda in his own company, Procyon Studio, that helped produce the music. Mitome continued their work from Luminous Arc 1 as a composer here in SOD. With the map designer, you have Masahiro Tori, who is a 3D map designer this time, but in Detective Conan, he was also a 3D map designer. And then you have Tomoki Oda, who did the character models, coming from Luminous Arc 2, who was the effect designer and the main pixel artist. It's really cool that you're seeing this growing team within Imageepoch, and not only that, you're seeing people stay, which is very important for the identity of Imageepoch games much later in the future. And I want to highlight another name in the special thanks, Kazuya Nino. He is a special thanks, so only very slight contributions, but enough to get credited. But this is how Seven Dragon gets started. Mikage is working with Sega. At some point, Mikage says, hey, we need more developers, pulls in Nino, fresh off from Ichiran Odyssey. I'm pretty sure that's how that conversation started, because the next game in the series is directed by Kazuya Nino. With the anime staff, you have a lot of relatively big names as well. The composer for the anime adaptation is Yoshiro Ike, and he did Ergo Proxy, Tiger and Bunny, and Kuroko no Basket. The English dub in particular, used Funimation voice actors versus the video game actors, and the video game actors are much more obscure, and in some cases, this is their only big game. This was done by a studio called Webtone. Webtone is notable for Ace Combat 4, and Ace Combat 4 is an extremely difficult game to dub, because you have a story segment in between missions that is told through stills, and you have to rely on the power of your voice actors to narrate that scene to give you that feeling of you're in a war, this is desperate, and they pulled it off really well. Ace Combat 4 is one of my favorite dubs, and it's honestly really impressive that they could carry that game. Not only that, you have Seaman, which is a Sega Dreamcast game, which is carried by only 2 voice actors, and 2 actors really, Jeff Kramer and Leonard Nimoy. So it's honestly really impressive that Webtone has these no-name voice actors, but they made an extremely good performance out of it. With the voice acting studio in Japan, it was Studio Gen, and they only did 1 anime, to my knowledge, which was The Guyver. The casting was done by Aoni Production Company. They're a fairly large company, and they do a lot of casting for Dragon Ball Z movies, and they did sound production for Kemono Friends, so they're a support studio, but they can hold on their own, and this is a pattern that is consistent with Imageepoch, where you have some support studios doing the opening animation for you, but they're still very good support studios. With all of this in mind, this is still very much an Imageepoch game. It's one of their, I would say, more genuine games, but you are seeing a lot of the weaknesses, and the greatest weakness is in the writing. So, Cheese and I are going to take a quick break. We're going to transition to the story summary, and we'll see you back after the story summary is done. So, stay tuned. Hi, I'm Pre-Recorded Sheep, and this is my good friend substitute, Processed Cheese Product, or PCP.
You and I were always stuck on repeat day by day.
Well, we're doing something completely different, and this time we're doing a pre-recorded summary of Sand of Destruction. Cheese won't be joining me. We both agreed that it might be better to record and edit this segment of the podcast first. Instead of Cheese saying nothing for 20 minutes, I'll be simulating Cheese talking through song clips. This segment is still heavily scripted though. And for this segment, I'm going over the game's plot, along with the anime and manga adaptations. I won't be going over the audio drama since I don't have all of it to make a conclusive assessment of it. But like last time, I'm going to assume that you've already played the game and you know all the spoilers coming in. Alright, I'm ready. You ready, PCP? Alright, hell yeah. And while we're here, I'm going to define some abbreviations. I'll also list them in the description. The World Salvation Committee, which Rajiv and Naja are a part of, are the SC. The World Annihilation Front, or the World Destruction Committee, which Morte is a part of, are the AF. The Golden Lions, which Ogden is a part of, are the GL. And Sand of Destruction is abbreviated to SOD. It's a thing for me because I don't like it when people start throwing acronyms at me like FET, QUAB, JWTWM, and shit like that. Your thoughts, PCP? LODSOVEMONE. Alright, hell yeah. The game starts with Naja and Rajiv delivering a sitrep to the World Salvation Committee. Rajiv is the son of Lupus Rex, one of the Beast Lords, while Naja is the son of another Beast Lord, Canis Rex. Beast Lords are basically the rulers of this world, and there are 12 of them. Rajiv likes to pull the race card pretty frequently around Naja. Even the rank and file look down on Naja because Naja is both cautious and half beastman. It's kind of like how the Solarians in Xenogears look down on surface dwellers, but there's a little bit more social commentary. We then cut to Morte performing a hate crime by firebombing Vito. The fight is broken up by flyers that fall from the sky, claiming that the AF have found their secret weapon, some guy named Kyrie who's capable of destroying the world. Morte escapes, and then the game cuts to Kyrie. Kyrie is just a regular kid who's helping out his grandpa with his restaurant. But because the flyers name him as a member of the AF, he gets questioned by Ursa Rex, a beast lord controlling Kyria's hometown. Compared to Rajiv, though, Ursa Rex is pretty nice and he's pretty reasonable. Things only escalate when Kyria hears a voice on his head that forces him to use his powers to turn the surrounding area into sand. When we think about it later in the story, this scene doesn't really make sense. But at this point in the story, it seems like the voice in Kyria's head is a defense mechanism, and the defense mechanism activates with the phrase "Acta est fabula." In Latin, that means the play is over. Acta est fabula is part of Emperor Augustus of Rome's last words. Acta est fabula, plaudite. The play is over, applaud. Historians argue that Emperor Augustus' last words reference his posturing and acting royal during his reign as Emperor of Rome. But in Sand of Destruction, it's referencing that Kyria's facade is being removed and showing his true nature as the Destruct. There's also part of the setting that's never really touched on. Most of the world is suffering from natural desertification, but nobody ever really explains why. We then cut to Rajiv and Nadja arresting Kyria after realizing what Kyria is capable of. Morte busts Kyria out of prison, but at the same time, Ogden is busting out his Golden Lion buddies. Morte and Ogden belong to the Sand Tribe, a group of humans living out in the desert that engage in guerrilla warfare. Both the Golden Lions and the Annihilation Front are trying to take down Beastmen.
I'm sorry!
No, it's kinda fucked, like if you really think about it. Even though Ogden and Morte know each other, they'd rather work separately. Ogden tends to point out that the Annihilation Front is more extreme than the Golden Lions, but as we're seeing with the Golden Lions, Ogden is violent enough to do a prison break for his buddies. In other words, one's an extremist group and the other's an extremist group.
What did you want again?
Morte and Kyria leave Ogden's ship, and Morte decides to rob a pleasure cruise. We try to rob Felix Rex, another beastman, but Topi stops us. The reason why Felix Rex is pretty lenient with us is partially because of Rhea. Rhea is a dragon, and while she isn't a beast lord, it seems like she has authority over Felix Rex. The game doesn't explain why dragons are better than beastmen, it's kind of an Imageepoch thing. They're better than you because they're dragons. And this raises more questions that the game is simply incapable of answering, and we'll discuss this with Real Cheese.
I'm worried about the future.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun poking at Rhea. It's also worth noting that the game points out that Rhea will join our party by giving her a quip. We know she's on our side, but we don't really know why she's being mysterious about it. It's not explained very well. We go to the Undercroft to get Felis weed, and then we sneak into the Botanical Garden to get a rose. The Botanical Garden is owned by Rana Rex, another beast lord, and it's never really explained why there's bad blood between Rana Rex and Felis Rex. There is some mention of division between the beast lords, but you really have to dig into the script to get to that. Along the way to the Botanical Garden, we run into Porcus Rex, who's trying to eat a kid for bumping into him, but Kyria intervenes. This scene is supposed to show how much Kyria is willing to go for peace, but it also points out that he's really naive with this world. We end up killing Porcus Rex, and Kyria's upset that the humans of Vito aren't happy that Porcus Rex is dead. If we look back to the Gama Sutra review, I think this is the one scene that Mikage panicked about that was going to give a Z rating to Sand of Destruction. Porcus Rex is planning to eat the kid, but maybe in Kato's first draft, Porcus Rex eating the kid and Kyria being too late to intervene. It's one of those ideas in the story that is presented in this one scene that gets completely dropped. Like how the humans of Vito freak out after witnessing Porcus Rex getting killed, and Topi even trying to kill a beast lord because he's just there for the ride. PCP, I certainly think that this scene is heavily edited, but what do you think?
I want it, I need it to make me delete it, take it.
Yeah, I really wanted to see what the original scene was, and if we skip to the manga, there are shades of that, so we'll talk about that later. For now, let's get back to the game. After a while, Morte gets sick of doing errands for Felix Rex and decides to escape with Kyrie, but not before Rajiv and Naja suspect Felis Rex of harboring criminals. And of course, Morte blows her cover by charging in and fighting Rajiv and Naja. We now have to split from Felis Rex and Rhea, but Topi wants to join because he's just bored. The team goes to the Sand Tribe to recruit Ogden, but Ogden got captured and is in the Sky Jail. And then Felis Rex and Rhea show up to help the team get into the Sky Jail, since Felis Rex wants Lupus Rex's scepter. It's supposed to be Rhea predicting what Morte and Kyrie are doing, but it's never really clear. By the time we get to Ogden, Rajiv is torturing Ogden. Naja tries to talk Rajiv down, but even he gets frustrated and leaves. Since Rajiv is busy gloating, Morte sneaks up on him for a boss fight. And at the end of that fight, Morte just fucking kills Rajiv. Yeah, Morte being ruthless is very different than most JRPGs I've played, because the normal thing to do is have the characters redeem themselves, right? The final boss is usually so far beyond redemption that the only thing that the main characters think is right is to kill them. But instead, this concept of redemption transfers to Naja. After seeing Lupus Rex grieve over Rajiv, Naja snaps. Lupus Rex confronts Morte and the team, and Morte just taunts Lupus Rex. If this were any other JRPG, there would be some drama with the team trying to justify killing Rajiv by spouting their ideals about a perfect world, but Morte just wants to pick a fight. After killing Lupus Rex, Naja finds us, and this is the first time we've ever seen Naja angry. Naja tries to chase after us, but we escape with Felis Rex, and Felis Rex stalls for time. Rhea gets a vision of the future and encourages, in a pretty roundabout way, for Naja to join the Annihilation Front before it's too late. This is the only time we ever see Rhea actually use her fortune-telling powers, but it's only ever brought up in passing from this point on. Again, this is a point that Real Cheese and I will be talking about, so stay tuned. No offense to present company, of course.
Hit 'em up. Grab your Glocks when you see Tupac. Call the cops when you see Tupac.
Yeah, let's move on. Ogden also sulks about betrayal in the Golden Lions, but that's never brought up again, because flyers fall from the sky, welcoming Ogden into the AF. And Ogden is not happy about this. Because, like I mentioned before, the Golden Lions see the Annihilation Front is too extreme. But in the same flyer, Lycaratus Rex asks us to kill the Primal Lords. The Primal Lords are basically embodiments of the four elements. If we kill them, we can destroy the world. Morte most notably doesn't think about why this is happening, and Kyrie is too passive to go against Morte. We return to Vito to get to the Azure Tower, but since we're second-class citizens, we're not allowed to go to the residential district. So instead, we go to Topi's house and get introduced to Muffy, Topi's girlfriend. She's fucking massive, and she's used for comedic relief after the very serious sand jail. We come up with a plan to rob Rana Rex, who we know has access to the elevator, and go to the botanical garden. There are some scenes of Beastmen guards abusing the human child laborers. Once we confront Rana Rex, he's convinced that we're just gardeners, which lets us get the jump on him. Once we get the pass, we can go to the elevator, but that begs the question of why we didn't just fight the guard manning the elevator if we're gonna wreak havoc anyway. Like, it doesn't also make sense that no one's batting an eye at Morte. It's also the same place where Porcus Rex got killed. It really doesn't make a lot of sense internally. It's mostly just you have to do this because you have to. So I'm also thinking that this part may have gotten rewritten, but there's no conclusive evidence for that. We fight the Azure Sea in the Azure Tower, a huge serpent, and the Azure Sea refers to Kyrie as the Destruct. Kyrie is starting to get doubts, but the voice in Kyrie's head urges him to continue. The flyers also fall from the sky and tell the team to kill the Golden Earth in Mekto. There's also this mysterious scene with different voices discussing the death of Azure Sea and how some sort of plan is set in motion. It's later revealed to be Lycaratus Rex, and this scene is very similar to how the Gazelle talk about phase progress throughout the story. While the AF is on the way to Mekto, a fog shows up. Kyrie wakes up alone and finds Rhea, who officially joins our party. We find Topi and Ogden, but not Morte. And once we do find Morte, she's being mind-controlled by Serpent's Rex. We kill Serpent's Rex, but not before Serpent's Rex curses Morte for being too pretty. Yeah, this boss just kind of appeared out of nowhere. To undo Morte's curse, Rhea suggests we go to Elephas Rex in the Spring Continent. Even though Elephas Rex is fully aware who Morte is, Elephas Rex offers his services because that's what you do as a doctor. Keep in mind, Elephas Rex is a beast lord, so he tries to convince Kyrie that the world is not worth destroying. Kyrie and Morte get a very touching moment, and this is the first time we ever see Kyrie this vulnerable and this grateful. If you've ever played Xenogears, it's very similar to how Faye and Ellie start to reconcile their differences once they're stranded in the ocean. This pushes Kyrie further into stopping, but Morte is still hell-bent on destroying the world. Chrono from the Golden Lion show up to beat up Elephas Rex, and this time Ogden intervenes. This is one of the last scenes that point out the divide between humans and beastmen. It shows up occasionally afterwards, but never in this capacity. The team goes to Mecto, where Naja is warning Aquila Rex of the AF's plans. Aquila Rex ignores Naja and even suggests that Naja was the one to kill Rajiv and Lupus Rex. Naja leaves in a fit of anger and gets a voiced line, and there is text that's colored like a quip, but there's no message confirming it. We then charge headfirst into Mecto, where the team gets split up because of heavy resistance. Morte and Kyrie kill Aquila Rex, and the SC backs off. We then gather our team again and then kill Golden Earth. But this time Kyrie verbally argues with the voice in his head, and it's loud enough for Ogden to hear. Meanwhile, there's another meeting with the remaining Beast Lords, Lacertus Rex, Noctua Rex, and Pistrus Rex. Felis Rex doesn't really care to join, and Elvis Rex is too busy with his hospital. Lacertus Rex mentions peace talks, and Pistrus Rex volunteers to go. Noctua Rex points out that Pistrus Rex is really after Lacertus Rex's position, but we never really know why, or even understand why Lacertus Rex is important. There's not enough time to address Kyrie's problem, because the AF's flyers tell the team to attend the peace talks with the Golden Lions and the Salvation Committee at the Sky Jail. The only catch is that only one representative from each group can attend. Morte volunteers, but Kyrie wants to go instead. It's a big enough disagreement that Morte doesn't see Kyrie off when Kyrie goes to the meeting. The peace talks feature Karna of the Golden Lions and Pistrus Rex of the Salvation Committee. During the peace talks, Karna and Pistrus Rex argue, but Kyrie eventually convinces both of them to stand down. For the first time, everyone finds some common ground. The Salvation Committee would handle most of the peace efforts, while the Golden Lions would act as an advocate for humans. The Annihilation Front would act as a check and balance for both the GL and the SC. Kyrie's thoughts eventually drift to Morte, and the voice in Kyrie's head activates Kyrie. The entire Sky Jail turns into sand, taking Pistrus Rex and Karna with it. The Crimson Sun appears to Kyrie and tells Kyrie to become the Destruct. Kyrie is shocked at what happens and wants to understand what the Destruct is, and Rhea volunteers her grandfather to help. The team travels to Garagus Waste to see Rhea's grandpa, which is a pile of dragon bones. Rhea can act as a medium to her grandfather's spirit and converse with Kyrie to tell him absolutely nothing. And then Naja shows up, and he's pretty fucking pissed. Naja points out the danger of Kyrie being unable to control his powers, and Kyrie breaks, and Kyrie asks Naja to kill him because Kyrie doesn't want to harm Morte. Naja kills Kyrie, and Naja immediately regrets it. Rhea is pretending not to be at fault and even looks down on Naja, even though it's implied that she predicted this. Morte and the team grieve for a while, but Ogden gets a note saying that Lacertus Rex knows how to bring Kyrie back. We go to the Clockwork Manor in Galoa, and Lacertus Rex explains how to revive Kyrie through the Crimson Sun. This is gonna be one hell of a plot dump, so strap in. Much like any grad student paper, it's titled The Destruct, Its Function in Nature, and Its Usage in Applied Form. In other words, please give me money. I know what I'm doing. It turns out Kyrie committing suicide was completely pointless because the world will still find a way to destroy itself. The destruct can never really die. It's a built-in system and it's not entirely human. The destruct's power is reverting everything into sand, and upon destroying the world is immediately reborn. The team enters the heart of the Clockwork Manor, which is basically a huge doomsday clock. Lycaratus Rex says that the Crimson Sun can revive Kyrie. Lycaratus Rex is only interested in using the power of the Crimson Sun to create something. We don't really know what. He's just saying, I want to help you because you're going to give me something I want. Nadja shows up before we leave and asks to join the party because he wants to know why they're doing all of this. Morte only lets Nadja join because that's what Kyrie would have done. Everyone else is on edge. This tension gets completely dropped once we go to the Tower of Light and meet the Crimson Sun. Along the way, Elephas Rex intervenes. Elephas Rex doesn't want the world to be restarted and destroyed because he thinks that there's something worth keeping. Unfortunately, he gets killed and laments that he should have never fought against Lady Rhea. So it seems like Rhea knows exactly what's happening, but she can never really tell us what's going on. Morte asks the Crimson Sun to revive Kyrie, but Kyrie doesn't want to be revived because he doesn't want the burden of being the destruct. Morte asks for the destruct code so that way she and Kyrie can share the burden of destroying the world, and Morte adjusts her plan to destroy the world but rebuild one where humans are happy. The Crimson Sun tells Morte the code phrase to activate Kyrie, Octa es Fabla, and Kyrie comes back to life, at the cost of the Crimson Sun fusing with Kyrie. Morte gets all tsundere with Kyrie, and Kyrie forgives Nadja for killing him.
Jesus Christ, that's a pretty face.
With the party back together, the team heads to the Tower of Wind and enter the Depths of Memory. The Depths of Memory is a dungeon created by Noctua Rex to stop the team, but it really only makes them feel bad for themselves. The memories in the dungeon are a foundation for the endgame side quests. Rhea can tell the future and foresaw her grandfather's death. Because she's not allowed to change the future, she eventually became distant. But Kyrie and Morte and the chaos surrounding them meant that things would always be interesting, despite the fact that Rhea can see the future. Like, if you really stop to think about Rhea and this segment, you can really tell that they gutted Rhea. Even the game is trying to push you along without really explaining her powers, so you can definitely tell at some point they wrote themselves into a corner. PCP, what do you think about Rhea so far? Yeah, you can definitely tell that of all the characters that were rewritten, Rhea was the one that was targeted the most. Let's move on to Nadja. Nadja was bullied for being a half-beastman and a half-human to the point that people started stoning him, despite the fact that his dad is a beast lord. His mom got in the way of one stone, which struck her head, and that's when he vowed to make the world a better place by joining the SC. Topi took on duels to the death as part of his job. One day, Topi fought his best friend, and Topi won. Topi couldn't bear to tell his friend's sister, Muffy, and due to the guilt, Topi began to take care of Muffy. Eventually, Topi fell in love with Muffy, but he still grapples with the guilt of killing both his best friend and hiding the truth from Muffy. Ogden used to have a close friend that was a beastman. Once they got older, Ogden's friend joined the Salvation Committee and acted racist towards Ogden. Ogden just laughed. Kyrie is still dealing with the trauma of destroying his hometown, but he finds the strength to keep moving through Morte. While Morte doesn't feel any guilt at all. Because of that, she can see through the cycles of guilt and understands that the Depths of Memory is just a trap set up by Noctua Rex. The team makes it to the Tower of Wind and beats the Jade Zephyr. Since Kyrie has accepted his role as the Destruct, Kyrie doesn't hear a voice in his head anymore. And then papers fall from the sky telling the team to talk to Lycaratus Rex. It turns out that Lycaratus Rex has been playing the entire team for chumps. The team tries to beat Lycaratus Rex, but it turns out it was only a robot. The real Lacertus Rex is in the Primal Cataract, which formed after Kyrie beat the last Primal Lord. So Lacertus Rex is using the team to open up the Primal Cataract so he can become God. By using the powers of creation after the Destruct has destroyed the world, Lacertus can make the world in his own image. But after we kill Lacertus Rex, we enter Block 4. Rhea explains that Block 4 is where the Creator is, and confronting the Creator is the only way that Kyrie can reset the world. Block 4, compared to everywhere else in the game, is this very futuristic place. If you've ever played Chrono Cross, it's very similar to the El Nido Triangle, right in the center of the world. It turns out that the Creator is Kyrie's true mother, and commands Kyrie to destroy the world. Kyrie refuses, but the Creator utters Octa Espabla to control Kyrie, but it doesn't work because only Morte can control Kyrie now. The Creator can't comprehend why we want to rebuild the world, since everything we've done up to the point is priming the world to be destroyed. After the team beats the Creator, Kyrie and Morte have one last goodbye and enter the final Pillar of Light. Morte and Kyrie get all touchy-feely in the darkness until they step into the light. The ending then cuts to an ocean full of water instead of sand. Augie Wharfs, one of the starting areas, is now full of humans with no beastmen in sight. Ogden is back commanding his ship, while Naja is commanding a group of humans in Mekto. Rhea is spying on a black cat. No, like a house cat. Not an anthro like Felis Rex, it's just a regular cat. Topi just fucks off. And then Morte and Kyrie just stand around and watch the sea lovingly. And that's it for Sand of Destruction. PCP, what are your thoughts on Sand of Destruction? Well, we're not done yet. We still have the anime and the manga to go over. Dude, don't blame me. This is what happens when you make 3 official adaptations to the story. The anime is quite a bit shorter, being 13 episodes long. In episode 1, Kyrie is working part-time as a cook, where he meets Morte in a restaurant. Kyrie is wearing cat ears to blend in with the beastmen, while Morte is covered in a big cloak. Morte's sword is also wrapped up in bandages, kind of like Nicholas D. Wolfwood from Trigun. The Salvation Committee busts in, but Morte takes Kyrie hostage, but Kyrie's fake ears fall off. So they're both on the run, and Morte explains that she has this orb called the Destruct Code, and she's trying to destroy the world with it, but she doesn't really know how. A village of cats tried to sacrifice Morte to a sand whale, but instead they end up capturing Kyrie. The SC shows up, and Topi just shows up to bail out Kyrie and Morte, but Kyrie activates the Destruct Code. Morte realizes that Kyrie is the key to destroying the world, and co-opts him into the Destruction Committee. Topi can come too. In episode 2, we get introduced to Ogden, who's just a smuggler. Ogden helps Kyrie and Morte get onto Felix Rex's ship, where Morte tries to get rich by gambling. Rhea and Naja are pursuing Kyrie and Morte, and this time around, they're established as recurring antagonists. Episode 3 touches on the divide of beasts and humans through the context of humans working in a gulag. There's also a relationship between a human prisoner and a beastman guard, and this is the first time other beastmen are played in a good light. Episode 3 is where the budget ran out as well, but there's a very high quality scene of Morte lying on the ground seductively, so take that as you will. Episode 4 is the one where the team travels to Vito and stumble upon a spirit that lingers on in this world. Rana Rex shows up, but he's not killed like in the game. It's really just a filler episode. Episode 5 is when Kyrie and Morte get into forced gladiatorial fights, while Topi is with his friend Ace. Ace tries to frame Topi from stealing money from the Colosseum, but Topi ends up taking the fall for his friend, and Topi commits to being part of the World Destruction Committee. Episode 6 is where we're introduced to Elephas Rex, and he's running a hospital and an orphanage. Elephas Rex is hiding his past as a war criminal, and Elephas' assistant was planning on killing him. The assistant's plans are foiled when the team intervenes, but this is also the episode when Kyrie starts to have recurring dreams about Morte's brother, Reeve. Episode 7 is my personal favorite episode with the fake World Destruction Committee. It turns out there are 2 fake destruction committees, one being a mostly harmless group, and another being the Innkeepers. So it's just a fun, wacky episode that doesn't really advance the plot, but I just liked it. Episode 8 is the bottle episode where Rhea, Toby, and Kyrie are stuck inside a bathroom in a rapidly sinking sand ship. Morte, Ogden, and Nadja are in another room, and they're trying to think of a way out. It's also the episode where Rhea starts throwing googly eyes at Kyrie and starts to hint that there's something a little deeper with Rhea. And after we're done with the filler, we get back to the plot with episode 9. Episode 9 is when Kyrie starts to piece together Morte's reason for destroying the world. Morte spends most of the episode helping a librarian in Galoa. The librarian's family was killed because they wanted beastmen and humans to coexist. Episode 10 kicks off the final arc, where the team goes to the Clockwork City. Morte and Kyrie have to disguise themselves as beastmen, but they blow their cover. The team nearly loses the D-Short code, which points them in the direction of the Garagus Wastes. Episode 11 has everyone, by which I mean Rhea, Lacertus Rex, and the World Destruction Committee, fighting over the D-Short code, ultimately ending up with Lacertus taking control of it. Episode 12 has Toby, Kyrie, and Morte trapped in the depths of memory. Toby thinks about his time in the village he grew up in, and also the time where he hit on Muffy. Kyrie experiences Reeve's final days before he got killed, and how the D-Short code got into Morte's hands. It's interesting because he doesn't have memories, but we don't really understand why. Morte ends up trapped in the depths of memories, reliving her childhood with her family and Reeve, until Toby and Kyrie snap her out of it. Episode 13, the final episode, has Rhea enter the depths of memories, where she recalls someone who looks like Kyrie. The only difference here is that Kyrie has like orangish hair instead of his normal dirty blonde hair. Kyrie remembers who he really is and realizes that the D-Short code isn't what it is. Kyrie himself is the D-Short code, while the object in the sphere that everyone thinks is the D-Short code is a device that stores Kyrie's old memories. Kyrie's hair changes color from blonde to orange, like in Rhea's memories, and prepares to destroy the world, but Morte stops him, and then the anime just ends. Suddenly everyone's alright, and now they're off to another adventure. PCP, what are your thoughts on the anime? Yeah, I agree. It was really rushed, and it's kind of weird considering that there were almost 7 episodes of filler in a 13-episode season. The anime doesn't really do much outside of advertising the game, and the anime doesn't even follow the game's story at all. The anime is really its own thing, and honestly, I think of it as an alternate universe. Right, if we think about how the game references the world being rebuilt and being destroyed in this endless cycle, it kind of makes sense for the anime to be this alternate universe, but you're gonna really have to stretch the script for that.
Worn out one-liners that you have heard before.
Yeah, well, the manga is just as rushed, but it's allegedly closer to the original script because of how dark it can get. So the manga starts off just as violently as the game, with the bombing of the Beastman city. Instead of just one area, it's an entire city this time, and Morte and Ogden are responsible for the bombing. Ogden hands Morte a picture, which kicks off the plot. And just like in the game, the first scene we see of Kyrie is him unconsciously activating his powers as a destruct. The next thing we see is Kyrie getting cornered in a desert by Rajiv and his troops, but Morte and Topi bail Kyrie out. It turns out that Kyrie had no memory of destroying the village he used to live in, and doesn't understand why he's being chased by the World Salvation Committee. Kyrie activates his power after a voice in his head tells him to awaken. Kyrie this time recites the activation phrase, Octa est fabla. Whenever Kyrie activates his powers, it's basically a nuke centered around him. When Kyrie willingly activates his powers by saying Octa est fabla, it turns into a one-handed Kamehameha. Rajiv was seriously injured fighting Kyrie, but he's recovering in Vito. Naja shows up and promptly gets called racial slurs by Rajiv and the other soldiers. This new character, Ko, helps out Naja. Ko is basically Naja's squire, if we think about it, and he's half beastman and half human, just like Naja. We cut back to Kyrie and Morte getting picked up by Ogden, and there's this cute scene with Morte and Kyrie. Ogden is fully introduced as a member of the WAF, and Topi is still just along for the ride. Morte explains that the world is better off destroyed, and this time Kyrie is visibly shocked. A sand whale then attacks the ship. Normally they're pretty peaceful, but because the world is so out of balance, they become violent. Morte can only put them out of their misery by killing them, and the only way to fix the world is to destroy it. At the same time, the team targets Porcus Rex, and he's only a target because Morte feels like killing him. Ogden hands a flare gun to Kyrie in case anything goes wrong. Topi and Kyrie stay behind, but they get ambushed by Naja. Naja asks Kyrie why he's destroying cities, but Kyrie gets pissed and tries to fight Naja and fails miserably. It turns out that Kyrie is being haunted by the guilt of killing people, and he's channeling that guilt so he can better control his powers. Topi tries to teach Kyrie how to become stronger by sword fighting with the pipe that looks like a bamboo stick. So while Naja toys with Kyrie, Ko is recording the fight from far away. Naja is figuring out that Kyrie can't control his powers, and he's trying to use Ko to study how Kyrie activates his powers. But Kyrie gets the upper hand in the fight by using a flare gun and good old Yamato Damashi.
Don't lose your way, your mind.
Kyrie manages to land a hit and promptly passes out. Naja, who's barely injured, muses if he's the one who lost.
Now bring me myself now.
Let's just go back to Morte. Porcus Rex doesn't even have time to fight back, and he's promptly cut in half by Morte. Morte notices the fight beyond Vito and rushes to help Kyrie. And it turns out that Morte is a huge tsundere around Kyrie. Morte punches Kyrie and immediately embraces him. Morte then shows Kyrie outside to a fucking firebombing of Vito. Morte asks Kyrie to use his powers to destroy the town, and this time Kyrie snaps. Kyrie and Topi end up joining Naja and Ko, with Kyrie realizing that Naja is far more humane than Morte. And Kyrie comes back momentarily to return the flare gun to Morte, but Morte snaps. Naja explains that Kyrie's power is disintegration, and explicitly it's the power to turn compounds into its base elements, but we'll get into that later. Meanwhile, Morte is hellbent on getting Kyrie back and rushes into Rhea, who kisses Morte on the lips. It's a plot point, just don't think about it.
I kissed a girl and I liked it.
Meanwhile, Kyrie and Naja watch a six-winged angel come down from heaven. The angel looks exactly like Kyrie, except clad in armor and with darker hair. The angel tries to recruit Kyrie for a mission, but Rajiv, Aquila Rex, and their army buy Kyrie time to escape. Ko retreats to record the fight while Rajiv gets his army disintegrated. Aquila Rex backstabs Naja right as Naja realizes the angel's attack pattern, and Aquila Rex begins to worship the angel. The angel's name is Vevrail, and if you know your Catholic mythology, that is Archangel Uriel. The angel takes control of Kyrie's body to use Kyrie's powers, while Rhea watches. She recites a poem about the angel destroying the world, while Kyrie manages to regain some control and fight back. Naja tries to explain the double slit experiment, but it's too hard for Kyrie to understand, so we just get another fight scene. Topi joins the fight, but gets intercepted by Rhea for some forced comic relief. They all run away from the angel, while Aquila Rex calls Lacertus Rex about Kyrie escaping. It turns out Morte was working for Lacertus Rex as part of the AF, while Rhea takes the team to the Gragas Wastes. Rhea introduces the team to her grandfather, a dragon skeleton that communicates telepathically to the team without the use of Rhea. Rhea's grandfather explains that the world has a cycle of death and rebirth that happens every 1,000 years. There's always a futuristic cradle of life that keeps a pair of every creature in the world alive. Ria's grandpa also explains that the previous cycle of humans were extremely futuristic, and the Beastmen didn't exist in that previous cycle. We learn that Kyrie is part of the Destruct, whose job is to destroy the world to continue the cycle. Ogden shows up and begs for Kyrie to rescue Morte, and the angel Fevrail refers to Morte as a princess. While Kyrie and the team head towards the AF headquarters, Ogden explains that Morte was a zealous believer of the Angels of Destruction. Meanwhile, the angel recognizes Morte as the planner, but the alternate readings of the kanji can be read as either princess, but the katakana refers to it as planner. But basically, Vivrail and Kyrie destroy the world, but the planner, Morte, defines the parameters of the next world. Pretty much, if the planner wants 1,000 years of war, then there's war. If the planner wants 1,000 years of peace, there's usually peace. Morte realizes that the current cycle with its rampant racism and oppression was her fault. Lacertus Rex tries to kill Morte in order to take her place as planner. Someone just has to make a wish at the right time, it doesn't always have to be Morte. Kyrie and the team come to the rescue, with Naja killing Aquila Rex. It turns out that the Clockwork City that Lacertus Rex is in is this cycle's cradle of life. Morte regains her fighting spirit long enough to get blasted through the chest by Vivrail. While Morte is dying, there's a flashback. Planner Morte had a crush on Angel Kyrie, which is the basis for the relationship in this cycle. The final chapter is another flashback to when the angels are discussing on how to create the new world. The writing is very, very specific that the planner doesn't create the new world, it's the creator. The planner just gives guidelines for the creator to follow. Planner Morte explains that all humans are creators, but Angel Kyrie knows that even if Morte plans for peace, there will always be unhappiness because right and wrong always have to exist.
You walk away, you don't hear me say.
So then a puppy shows up, and Planner Morte picks it up and wishes for a world for anthropomorphic animals. That's it. That's literally the fucking plot twist.
'Cause there is no cock like horse cock. Send your asshole into shock.
It turns out that Kyrie is the creator who harnesses the power of humanity and defeats Vivrail. But Morte is still dead. But since Ria kissed Morte on the lips when they first met, she's able to come back to life because dragon's blood lets you become immortal. So then everyone celebrates and then Ria sings about the cycle being broken. Somehow. Well, that was the manga PCP. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't know about you folks, but I could lose my keys eating breakfast.
Well, that's it for pre-recorded sheep and processed cheese product.
So it's goodbye again.
Back to the actual podcast. All right, and we're back. So that was a story summary, Cheese. What do you think about Standard Destruction as a whole?
I think it's above average, especially compared to some of their previous games. It's clear that they're improving, but there's something lacking, either caused by some internal issues or the rewrite like we talked about. I'm not sure what's missing, but something's missing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, if you stop and think about it, a lot of the plot beats are very reminiscent of Xenogears, but the pacing is similar to Chrono Cross, where you have a good start, a pretty good twist, but then the ending is just extremely rushed. And I honestly think the game was too short that it couldn't handle a plot dump. And honestly, I think there were way too many things that were unexplained. It had a really good premise, but it was just lacking punch. There were good things to set up, but you honestly needed more character development, and you honestly needed a little more explanation, but that's a monkey's paw, coming from Kato. Most notably, the game and the anime split stories. With the writer of the anime, the screenplay was done by Eiji Umehara, who did the RE0 script. And also, written by Masahiro Yokotani, who did Free and ReZero as well. I think the story of the anime held on its own, but you really have to think of it as an alternate universe. I thought that was interesting with the idea of like cycles, and every time this world is destroyed, a new one is rebuilt, but there needed to be more like nudge nudge wink wink moments in the anime and in the other adaptations that we just didn't get. Honestly, I think that a New Game Plus cycle would have improved by like adding in certain scenes that you didn't see the first time, like why does Naja know this when he really shouldn't? Or like, why is Ria telling us this when she didn't have any right to in the first loop? Really, with the anime splitting on its own, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of mixed on it. On the one hand, you get two different but similar stories of like, oh, two different people had their take on the same thing, which is good. But on the other hand, if the two were meant to be together as one cohesive whole, they strayed too far apart from each other for that to work. Maybe the goal of the anime leading as like an advertising thing worked for the first couple of episodes, but if you bought the game after that point and played it, then you would realize that the anime had no bearing on what you actually just played. So it's weird.
Yeah, the endings are so different, and in some cases the characterization is a lot more different, where Morte has a more developed backstory in the anime, but in the game, she's evil because she wants to destroy the world. And in some cases, it completely twists a character, where Ria is an antagonist for most of the game, rather than being this like mysterious, I'm kind of on your side, but not really character. It does feel a little bit jarring. What makes this even weirder is the manga. The manga is drawn by Minoru Murao, who did Last Exile, which is one of the series that got me into anime, and has a very special place in my heart, but you can also see his own take on it as well. Where Ria specifically is just this weird space case. In the game, again, is a mysterious character who knows a little too much about something but can't tell you, but then you get the anime where she's just flat out bloodthirsty. I think it would be better to talk about what stays the same in all adaptions, and the first one is Topi literally not giving a shit in every single one. Topi is introduced very early on in every single adaptation, but he's always like this too cool for this guy. He doesn't really do anything to carry the story, he's just there because he looks cool. And Cheese, what are your thoughts on these kinds of characters?
It's more of like a comedic thing, right? Because everyone else is so serious in the story, it's nice to have a break with Topi. So I think that's more than fine. In regards to other characters that like don't have an investment in the story, some of them are just literally there to drive the plot along, right? Oh, we're in this town. I talked to this person who happens to tell me that this thing is going on. That's probably important.
Yeah, and one thing that actually stays the same are sand ships as an early set piece, and Ogden literally being introduced as the guy who has a car, and he has almost no bearing on the plot. Ogden is honestly a wasted character, but I do understand like how you see Topi as like, yeah, this game is getting dark, I think you need like someone to say a cool one-liner. It's also just a visual gag, right? Literally like a Winnie the Pooh size like teddy bear that can kick your fucking ass, so I do get that. Vito is always an early destination in every single adaptation. Aquila Rex and Lacertus Rex are antagonists, where Aquila Rex is the brawn for Lacertus Rex's brain. And Lacertus Rex usually has some sort of, like, ulterior motive. Ria knowing something that ties the plot together, and for whatever reason doesn't tell you until it's, like, way too late. And dragons themselves being this integral source of knowledge, culminating in going to the Gragas Wastes and visiting Ria's grandparents, and using love as a way to stop the world from ending. Honestly, those are like bullet point outlines that hold every adaptation together. I agree that it's really interesting to see like how someone who did The Last Exile, who is very interested in the world building write a manga that had a lot of intricate world building as well and only cram it into 2 volumes, I think that's a very fantastic experiment. But there's nothing that really ties any one adaptation to another one, aside from this idea that cycles happen, but we never really understand the mechanics of it, and it's only ever laughed at in the manga adaptation where literally Morte picks up a puppy and says, "Hey, I want anthros in this world. Can we do that?" So moving on with this idea of unexplored themes, I really think that Morte was extremely underdeveloped. She had a lot of potential, but was never really used to her maximum potential. She has touching moments with Kyrie. They build a relationship throughout the entire story, and you can see how close they are to each other. But you could have tied Ogden and Morte together, and Morte could have been part of the Golden Lions, but splintered off because the Golden Lions are just not extreme enough for her. You really didn't need Ogden. There is also this recurring theme with every Imageepoch game about questioning who is really good and who is really evil. Morte is part of the World Destruction Committee, but the other human team that is trying to liberate humans is also an extremist group. Why would Morte be considered more extreme if the Golden Lions are just as extreme? With the Beastmen antagonists as well, they're just shown with zero remorse, so Morte performing acts of terrorism are okay because the Beastmen are worse. That doesn't really make a lot of sense if you want someone to look heroic, but Rajiv is so sadistic to Ogden that Morte is heroic because Morte saves Ogden. To make matters worse, the story paints Rajiv deserves getting killed, which is very hard to justify, but you have to remember that if you write a psychotic character, this is what happens. And they don't really comment on that at all. Rhea is the character I have the most problems with, as I've mentioned hundreds of times before, but Rhea is not written very well. The only reason why Rhea cannot tell us about the plot is because she can't. That is her entire backstory. Cheese, I'm going to throw this to you. Do you have any examples of characters or a plot device where clairvoyance is written well?
I'm not going to say it's written well, but around the time this came out, there was a specific series I had in mind, and that is Code Geass with Lelouch.
Oh my god, I forgot about Code Geass. Yeah, that is a fascinating example. Let's talk about Code Geass. Do you remember that?
I don't remember anything about it at this point, and I need to rewatch it.
Let's rewatch it together. Let's actually include this in the next episode, because I really want to talk about clairvoyant characters, or characters that are seemingly omnipotent, because that does factor a little bit into Seventh Dragon. So let's watch Code Geass.
Okay, sounds good.
I do have one example, and that's also from an anime, from Mirai Nikki. Mirai Nikki's entire conceit is that you have this death game with a bunch of different characters who can predict the future in some way. So for example, our main character Yuki, he can predict the future of everything around him, but he can't predict the future of everything that happens to him. With Yuno, the deuteragonist of Yume Nikki, she can predict the future to everything specific to Yuki within every 10 minutes. But her weakness is that she doesn't know anything about herself or anything around her unless she gets killed. Another cool example is this character named Reisuke. And Reisuke gets a coloring book, and whenever he opens it up, he gets 3 major events that happen in the day, which let him plan generally, but it can't really tell the immediate future. So, very big idea, but in the middle of a fight, he's more or less completely useless unless the coloring book tells him about that specific fight. So there are really interesting ways you can play with the idea of clairvoyance, but this game just does not do it well. And it's unfortunate that Rhea just gets shafted in every single adaptation, because I liked Rhea as a character and as a playable character, but as a plot device, it is terrible. One game that I do want to compare to, and one that does break my internal rules, which is why I didn't talk about it in the video, is Radiant Historia. I don't want to talk about games made after the fact I review them, because a lot of things are at play where you don't really know if Radiant Historia took notes from Sand of Destruction, but I want to talk about this because there are so many similarities that you can find within Radiant Historia, and I think it's really nice that you're here, Cheese, because you can act as a balance for me, because I really like Radiant Historia and I don't want to get carried away. Before we begin, what are your thoughts on limiting the scope of the review to games within this 2-year time period, but aren't after the game?
I think that's fair to sort of scope it down, because if we were comparing a 2008 game to a modern day RPG, there's very little comparison you can do outside of like system level comparisons. The rest of the game is completely different at this point. If you keep it within the scope of a few years within each other, there's only a limited amount of like technological improvement or writing improvement that you can sort of gain over that period. So it's probably fine to compare within that period. Outside of it, you're probably comparing apples and oranges at that point.
Yeah, and that's something I want to avoid. This is really just a story about the game in Imageepoch. I don't really want to say like, hey, I like this game, you should play this game. And a lot of the games that I like are years apart from like Sand of Destruction or Seventh Dragon, for example. Aside from the years of polish that Radiant Historia may have received compared to SOD, Radiant Historia had a team of writers. In Sand of Destruction, you only have one writer. Radiant Historia, or I'm going to abbreviate to RH, RH had 3 writers, and then you had one director, Mikage, versus 2 directors. To drive the point further, 2 of the writers from Radiant Historia, this was their first credit as a writer, and yet Radiant Historia is leaps and bounds more consistent in its writing and much more thoughtful in its writing. Let's talk about the setting. In the setting, both games have their world suffering from desertification. With RH, this is a frequent plot element and is frequently referred to. In terms of lore, there's a runaway spell, and a lot of the mystery is trying to find out what is causing desertification and how do we, the main characters, stop it. And it turns out that there's a human sacrifice involved, and the entire endgame is this personal struggle of, do I sacrifice myself for the world? Or do I give in to the antagonist, be selfish, live my life as I want to, and watch the world around me fall apart? With Sand of Destruction, it's only ever mentioned in passing and it's never brought up again. Quite literally, when you get Morte, and once Morte and Kyrie escape from Ogden's sand ship, they talk about the world and that's it. That's all you ever see about desertification. You never understand the cause of it, you just know that the world is going to shit. The villain of Radiant Historia, it's only ever seen as like third act James Bond villain. I have you in my clutches, let me tell you all about my master plan. With Morte, you have the entire game to understand Morte, and it's never more than just, I want to destroy the world. Radiant Historia has a weaker villain because their backstory is explained in a very quick rush, but you have this immense amount of time with Morte to understand her as a person, and you never do. There is this sub-theme in both games about cycles. Radiant Historia has a lot of time travel in it, and a lot of the story beats are predicated around the idea of going back in time, and the game itself even splits into 2 timelines, so there is a lot of interplay between both, and the mechanics of time travel are very frequently talked about throughout the plot. In the beginning, you have the characters not really understanding it, and you have these guides within the White Chronicle, the time travel device, giving you tidbits of hints, and then by the end of the game, you understand fully how the time travel mechanic works. This time travel mechanic is used to solve puzzles, and it's an integral part of the game. With Sand of Destruction, you only ever find out that the world is this repeating cycle at the very end of the game when Crimson Sun explains it to you, And when the creator says, Kyrie, why aren't you destroying the world, honey? There is this level of thought and detail put into Radiant Historia that Sand of Destruction simply did not have. What's also even funny is that there's furry racism in both. Where Radiant Historia, it's not even a plot point, it's just, we don't like humans. Yeah, fuck you guys. And then Sand of Destruction, oddly enough, uses racism as a main theme, and then completely drops it to just fight God, dude. Honestly, I can make another video about Radiant Historia versus Sand of Destruction, but I want to review every Imageepoch game first, and then go back to these kinds of games in the post-season. But Radiant Historia is one of my favorite games, and I really do want to talk about it in a different context, in a different light, but I'm going to hard cut it here. Because I get to talk about my second favorite bit, unfortunate implications. This is just something I like to poke at, this is just for fun. I respect Masato Kato as a writer, I respect everyone at Imageepoch, but when you have a rushed game and when you don't really think about the consequences of certain things that you write, people can interpret that differently, and I just like this part for fun. We're not ridiculing anyone, we're basically using a microscope to look at the sun, and I think that's fun. One of them is Topi being the creator's pet. Topi is pretty much Mikage's favorite character, and Mikage went on to say that most of the dev time went into Topi looking good. I understand that he's supposed to be this, like, balancing effect in the team and with the darkness of the story, but that's kind of why he's overpowered, and that's also why he has the most unique animations outside of Kyrie. It's to the point that he gets a cameo in a Phantasy Star Portable 2 DLC. What I'm trying to say is that it was a little bit obvious that he got a lot of favoritism, as opposed to a character that really needed that support like Ogden. Killing yourself is okay if it's for the benefit of others, so you heard it here, and you heard it from Kato. Remember to kill yourself if you want to help people.
Don't do that.
Please don't. Honestly, no, do not do that. Likewise, if you have a significant other that you need to fix, just kill yourself. Don't do that as well. Please don't do that. Sand of Destruction is flat out incapable of handling racism, or even talking about it. It's so ham-fisted, and it's so much in the point of beastmen are evil, but beastmen are also evil because they treat humans bad. This is kind of a social issue in Japan, because with Japan specifically, there is no law that prohibits racial discrimination. In fact, Japanese First Nations are still targets of this. You have the Ainu who are in Hokkaido, and you have the Ryukyuan who are in Okinawa. They are frequently subjected to this systematic level of racism and even whitewashing of Japan's imperialist past. In 2007, the Ministry of Education advised history book publishers to reword descriptions that the Japanese army forced Okinawan civilians to kill themselves via hand grenade. This is after losing the Battle of Okinawa in World War II. Upon hearing that suggestion, 100,000 Okinawans protested against this, and this was the largest demonstration in Okinawan and Japanese history. The Textbook Authorization Council kind of backtracked and said, alright, you're allowed to say that the military forced the Okinawans to commit suicide, but you need quote-unquote sufficient context. This is a pretty big contemporary social issue, and it's only shown partially through this, like, tension in Sand of Destruction, and somehow the game cannot even talk about it and even explore that idea. It's only ever used as, like, this shocking set piece to get you into the game. Personally, I think that's very distasteful if you can't really talk about the main point of it. Games that have racism as a driving plot point are done much more tastefully in games like Valkyria Chronicles, or even in some cases, Tales of Symphonia, which came out in 2003. Like, you can talk about it, but that needs to be a driving plot device that you have to keep coming back to, and you can't say, kill God. The suicide thing, yes, we laugh about it, but it is a very serious issue in Japan as well. In 2007, the Japanese government wrote a counter-suicide white paper. And by 2009, they had committed 16.3 billion yen towards suicide prevention. So this is an extraordinarily big issue in Japan. To see Kyrie sacrificing himself as a plot point, like, you're basically saying it's okay to kill yourself, and you have characters like Elphys Rex saying, it's okay that Kyrie killed himself because he did it for the betterment of society. That is part of the reason why this white paper was written, because in Japan, suicide is seen as acceptable and as honorable, and the fact that Kato is slinking back to that societally accepted, it's okay to kill yourself if it's done honorably, it doesn't put a very good feeling in anyone's stomach. It's something that the game really needed more time to talk about, and for the 1.5 hours that it was a big deal, it felt like there was no consequence because Kyrie was immediately revived. And really, to wrap up this point, do you have any other thoughts now that we've talked about a lot of the unsavory things and possibly even some of the social issues that may have contributed to these weirder plot points being in Sand of Destruction Cheese?
I think you had mentioned it earlier, but Kato was coming off of a time where he couldn't really write darker stuff, so he ended up writing darker stuff. I wonder if that was a consequence of it, and maybe he felt a certain way that caused him to write that at some point, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, like, maybe he didn't jive with Mikage's management style, and maybe he was feeling that level of restriction again in Sand of Destruction, and he's like, I have to rewrite this entire shit again.
He might have been thinking, there's 2 ways out. 1, do it. 2, end it.
Right, and again, this is the point of the podcast where it's really speculative, and we're trying to piece together a story that on purpose does not have these breadcrumbs for us to follow. And this is really where you can see some of the frustration in some of the Imageepoch employees and contractors that work with Mikage. They are pushed to an absolute limit, and maybe this could have been some sort of very esoteric cry for help.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
This gets weirder when we talk about the Japanese nationalism in Seventh Dragon 2020. That is going to hit a lot closer to home for me. And I think, we're trying to get all the laughs out now because we are going to have to talk about this where it does get pretty serious with Japanese nationalism. And now we have to talk about that from the outside looking in. So this is kind of priming us for those weird discussions. Yeah, it's going to be an uncomfortable little bit, but I do want to keep this in because I think it's important for everybody to know where we're coming from as not only reviewers, but as people as well. So let's wrap up and let's talk about our closing thoughts. Sand of Destruction is this watershed moment where we start seeing problems with Mikage's style of development. The games are starting to look more rushed than they really should, despite having these big names attached to them. And even in the review series, as I'm going through it, I'm trying to find my own balance with presenting these arguments that I talk about in these other videos and trying to really bring those arguments home and trying to really talk about what is going to contribute to how well or how poorly these next games are going to be. With Seventh Dragon, I really want this episode to go well. I have a lot of personal attachment to this, which I'm going to talk about in the podcast, but I really want to keep the momentum that I gained from Sand of Destruction going. I learned a lot about my style as a reviewer. I think it really did show in Sand of Destruction, and I really do want to make sure that Seventh Dragon is the video that is something that you want to watch as a viewer as well. So to that end, I'm going to be breaking my unwritten rule of no more than 1 hour long videos. I think it's worth it to have a quick look back at everything that I've done so far and just make a good video. Geez, what are your thoughts?
I'm excited to see where you go with it, honestly.
All right, awesome. So I'm Sheep, that's Cheese, and we're going to see you in the next one. So stay tuned. It's going to take a while, but I'm really hoping that it is something that you will enjoy. Ite, misa est.